Support for The Nocturnist comes from the California Medical Association. This season of The Nocturnist is sponsored by the Physicians Foundation.
At The Nocturnist, we are careful to ensure that all stories comply with healthcare privacy laws. Details may have been changed to ensure patient confidentiality. All views expressed are those of the person speaking and not their employer.
You're listening to The Nocturnist, stories from the world of medicine. I'm Emily Silverman. Today, we speak with medical student Melanie Ambler, who is also a cellist and shares a story about the most memorable cello concert she's ever performed, which happened to be over Zoom with an audience of only one person. In addition to her medical studies at Stanford, Melanie works as a musician on call for Project Music Heals Us, which you'll hear more about in the conversation that follows her story. She graduated from Brown in 2019 and was awarded a Fulbright Fellowship to study music and dementia in France. Melanie told her story live at the Nocturnist show in San Francisco in June of 2022, and then, as you'll hear in our conversation, again in Chicago in September 2022 at a special show that we did at the Women in Medicine Summit. And it's that second performance that you will hear in this episode today. In the conversation that follows, we'll talk about Melanie's love of her instrument, her experience working with the Nocturnist story coaches, and a bit more about the work that she's doing at the intersection of music and medicine. I know you'll enjoy Melanie just as much as I did. Here is Melanie's story.
It's been a bad week. I've had this lingering cold for over 3 weeks, and I've been coughing so much, and every time I cough, people think I have COVID, so I've been holding in my cough, and because of that, my entire body hurts. My abs have literally never been this defined in my life. It's also my first week of exams in medical school. I've never been this stressed in my life. I have no idea what is going on. I don't know how to study, and I'm terrified. My crush is also fully leading me on. He's being incredibly problematic, saying, "Oh, I'm just not ready right now." And I'm like, when's now gonna happen? Is it gonna be sooner rather than later? I have no idea. And in my one moment of joy, I'm sitting in class, my friend tells me a joke, I laugh, and my rib pops. It quite literally pops out, goes back in, and in my very limited medical knowledge, I know that that's probably not supposed to happen. And so I've spent the past few days sitting on my couch, hugging a pillow, watching Zoom lectures, eating a lot more Ben & Jerry's than I care to admit, just trying to get by. But it's reached Wednesday of that week, and I have a virtual concert to give. I started playing virtual concerts for critically ill patients at the start of the pandemic, and every Wednesday I sign on. I connect with a Veterans Affairs hospital in Denver, Colorado, and I play one-on-one concerts for patients. Normally, it is the absolute highlight of my week. This week, I am dreading signing on, but I've made a commitment. So I get up off the couch, put my spoon in the sink, go grab my cello of 17 years, her name is Shelby, longest relationship I've ever been in. Open my door, walk into my room, go into that familiar corner between my bed and my wall with just enough room for my bow to pass. I open up my computer, plug in my little USB microphone, and click that familiar blue Zoom logo. And immediately, Tim's face fills the screen. Tim is the pulmonary critical care doc that I've been working with for the past 2 years on this project. And he is the most wonderful human being, mentor, role model in my life. And not even his smile can cheer me up that day. So instead, he goes into telling me a little bit about the patient that I will be playing for. He says, Melanie, Mr. N is the first patient that we found for you today. He's been here for a while, but he's actually going home today. And he would really love to hear some music. So I plaster on my best smile, and Tim takes me on the little iPad and on the rolly cart, and he walks me through the hospital, through the halls. I see nurses' stations, and we walk into Mr. N's room, and the first thing I hear is the heart rate monitor, and next the screen tilts down, and Mr. N comes into view. He's just kind of sitting there in a chair right by the window, and he's ready for some music. So I introduce myself, big smile, in pain. I say, hi, Mr. N. My name is Melanie. I'm a first-year medical student calling in from sunny California, and I heard that you're going home today. I have the perfect piece for you. Unlike y'all, Mr. N did not like that piece. He just kind of looks at me. He says, Melanie, can you do something for me? And I'm thinking, sure, I'll do something for you. I'm not in enough emotional, physical pain. Of course. What would you like? Can you play me something from your heart? does with the warmth of just having played. I can see those familiar indents from the strings. And as those begin to fade, this familiar tightness forms in my right hand from holding the bow. I feel no pain. Mr. N has melted into his chair. His eyes are hazy, as if he's just woken from a long sleep. He says, "Melanie, a piece of your soul just entered my body." I play this piece, Appalachia Waltz, for almost every patient that I have the pleasure of meeting. What does it do for you? Where do you feel it in your body? Where do you go? Where do I go? I keep a journal of all of these interactions and these stories. And some patients have told me that it's as if they've lived through their whole childhood over the course of a single day. Another said that it was like going through a slow-moving roller coaster in a hallway, and every door that opened, a new memory would swing into view. One was of his children, another was of his wife, and the last was of his mom, who had just recently passed. But why do I keep that journal? Is it for my ego? Maybe a little bit. But I think more so it's to delve deeper into those moments, to stay in them a little bit longer, and to continue to suspend time. Growing up, my mom used to share this saying with me and my brother. She would say, "I am the center of the universe. I am a speck of dust." And when I'm playing these concerts for an audience of one, they are the only universe that I see. I'm able to ask them questions, to meet them where they are, to see them as universes, not as specks of dust. Whereas when I'm here, I'm sitting on stage, I see more specks of dust than I see universes. And on Zoom, of all places, I feel that magic. I feel big. And the patient is able to share part of their story with me. How does this even relate to medicine? As a second-year medical student now, shit's getting real. I'm gonna have to start going to the hospital soon. I have to interview patients. They're gonna ask me questions. I'm not gonna know the answer to them. And I feel already conscious incompetence. I know that I do not have the answers. And yet, playing these concerts in a medical setting, a patient can ask me a question, like, play me something from your heart, or can you do something for me? And I can actually do what they ask and what they need. And as someone who's just starting, I get that feeling of fulfillment that I think a lot of you get every day with your patients. And that's something special. That's something healing for me and hopefully for those that are listening. So Mr. N and I, we talk for potentially longer than I play. He tells me about his life, and I confide in him that I was having a pretty bad week, and he just goes, I know, I could tell. We both needed that. And so I realize, as we're wrapping up, that the time is running low. I have another patient to play for, and that I have one last song for him, aptly named Going Home.
So I am sitting here with Melanie Ambler. I almost said Dr. Melanie Ambler, but you still have a little while till you get your MD. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm a second-year medical student at Stanford School of Medicine.
Do people say student Dr. Melanie Ambler, or is that phrase out of style?
I've heard that started being used more recently for doctors and preceptors to introduce their medical students as student doctors, but I've never been called that.
Okay. What do you just say that you're a med student?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, Melanie, I feel like I've actually had the pleasure of getting to know you a bit more than is usual for nocturnist storytellers. I think first because we live in the same geographic area. So I'm in San Francisco, you're down in Palo Alto. I've also been down to Stanford a few times, so we met there. And then you told a story at our show in San Francisco, and then you told the story again in Chicago. And yeah, we've just been able to hang out a bunch. So I'm so excited to share your story with the Nocturnist audience, and also just to hear a bit more from you about the amazing work that you're doing.
Yes, thank you so much for everything. It's been a wonderful experience, and also super special to be able to work on the story twice, actually, and have the experience of working with two coaches.
Yeah, so walk us back to the very beginning. So we put out the call for stories related to the theme of Together Again, and you submitted this amazing audio clip where you were talking, and I think you played cello and you sent that in initially. So did you know you wanted to do like a hybrid music / story? And what was it like to send in that clip?
I honestly didn't really know what I was doing when I was recording the first story. I had just recently had an incredibly powerful experience while playing a virtual concert for a patient, and thought that the theme of Together Again fit perfectly with it, and that I was experiencing being together with someone, but not physically. And there's something about sharing a moment virtually that I didn't expect to feel that amount of togetherness, but I did. And so my initial story recording was actually me essentially free associatively talking about this one particular piece, Appalachia Waltz. And it was a very rambling saga of all of the different times that I've played it. And because I was talking about this piece so much, I decided to just do it with my cello as well and end the recording with that particular piece. And I wasn't really expecting to hear back. I kind of did it as an exercise for myself because I've really been wanting to explore storytelling more and had considered writing about this particular experience, but there was something about the written word that I felt couldn't capture what I wanted to capture. And so having the opportunity just within my own room to speak out loud and record it helped me conceptualize what exactly these concerts are starting to mean to me. And I remember just saying, this feels like therapy. Because there's something very intimate about sharing my music and what that music does for me with other people.
Yeah, I always like to joke that story development is half story development and half therapy in a way, because in order to respond to the story and let the story guide us to where it wants to guide us, we have to kind of surrender and also explore and figure out what are our motivations for telling the story. And I know that I've been really humbled by that process recently. But before we get there, tell us a little bit more about your relationship to your instrument. So when did you start playing the cello, and how did that weave its way into your medical journey?
I grew up in a small town in Connecticut called Reading, and my little public elementary school had an incredible music teacher. Actually, multiple. One was named Kathy Weiss and the other Mary Jane Rogers. And they both had such enthusiasm for music. My grandmother was a harpist and music historian. My mom is a pianist and harpist. And so music had always been present within my life. But in third grade, we had the opportunity to choose a string instrument. And there was this one day where 4 different instruments were represented at this class assembly, and they had older students come and play each of them and show us what they sounded like. And then we could fill out a form if we wanted to play one of the instruments with our top 3 choices. And so I listed violin first, then cello, and then viola. And I don't know what happened, but I got home that day and I had my first of many existential crises and realized I actually want to play the cello. What am I doing? And so I called Dr. Rogers and I said, can I please change to cello? And she, of course, hadn't even looked at the forms yet. And she said, yeah, of course, no problem. And so we went out and rented a little half-sized cello. It really was something that I immediately fell in love with. I never once was asked to practice by my parents. I just wanted to play all the time. And every single night I had this routine where I would have dinner, then I would play cello, then I would take a shower, and then watch a little show, and then go to bed. And that's just kind of what I did. And I then started working with a private teacher and playing in an orchestra, and that started an entire journey of cello and music really being inseparably tied to my identity and what I love in life.
When you got to college and then med school, did you bring your cello? Were you playing the whole time, or did you have a period of years where it was sitting in the closet gathering dust? I feel like that happens with a lot of people, but maybe for you, you were more engaged.
I've never had a break. I almost feel that playing my instrument is required for my well-being. which I guess is a pretty healthy requirement. But from age 8 all the way up until now, I don't think there's been a longer span than a few weeks or months. I broke my thumb, so I couldn't play for a little bit, but it was usually an outside cause, not a decision that I made myself. I got the cello that I currently have, whose name is Shelby, after the Delta Airlines representative that helped me book a ticket for her one year. And I got that when I was 16. And since then, have kept her with me. And I brought her to college at Brown, which I think you also went to Brown, which is exciting. And then brought her out to Stanford with me once I came here. I did have a brief stint where I had to rent a cello because I was living in France and I could not bring Shelby with me, but she's always been there, and I think I'll likely have her for the rest of my life.
All right, well, let's get to your story. So you're in med school, this pandemic arrives, and you start to volunteer to do these virtual concerts for patients. And you decide that that means something to you. Maybe you're not exactly sure what or why or how, but it feels important. You submit this story idea to the Nocturnist, and you get paired up with Charlie, your first coach. Tell us about working with Charlie on that story.
Charlie is like a warm hug. He, first of all, loves the cello, has worked with a cellist before, so that was really nice. He also went to Brown, and working with him required a lot of intention when I signed on. He asked questions that I often didn't have the answer to. He also worked with me a lot on phrasing and pauses and how the organization of the story could go from what I submitted, which was an absolute hot mess, to something that was digestible, understandable, moving, and still kept the core of what I wanted to get across. That was no easy task because I had a lot of information in my first recording, and then we really went through together and created a skeleton of the progression of how I wanted to express the meaning of these concerts. And we started shying away from the importance of the specific piece that I had initially talked about to this one specific interaction that I had with a patient. And by doing that, it grounded the story and allowed me to explore a lot more of the emotions surrounding that and going into the moment. So he's all about putting yourself back into the exact second that you're experiencing something, and the fact that storytelling is kind of like chewing gum. You can either choose to compress it and say 2 words about a moment that could span days, or you could spend minutes talking about a sensation you felt for 5 seconds. And that's a really special part of storytelling that I hadn't really explored before, and he helped me discover that for the first time.
And what was it like to perform that story on the stage in San Francisco?
It was so special. I'm smiling right now. I was lucky enough to be in a location where some of my loved ones were able to attend as well. My mom was in the audience. And I felt this sense of community and peace on stage that I honestly have never felt before playing cello for a live audience. And I think it was partly the fact that so many other storytellers were there also opening up and sharing moments that are near and dear. And also this communal, again, sense of together again, which was the theme of the show. The show started with you, Emily, leading everyone in this meditation and recognition of the fact that we were all together again. And we had these little light up candles that were under each seat. And I remember looking around and just seeing little orbs of light kind of floating in the dark in this theater. And that set the stage for an evening that I really won't ever forget.
And then you get an email that says, come to Chicago. And did you bring Shelby to Chicago or did you have a sub?
I did not. I cheated on Shelby. I had a Belgian cello named Thomas. He's born in 1997, just like me. We had a little one-night stand in Chicago. And then I came back to Shelby. I mean, they say what happens at conferences stays at conferences, so I don't know.
Absolutely. And you mentioned that you have harpists in your family, which I didn't know because at that event in Chicago, which for the audience was the Women in Medicine Summit at the Drake Hotel in Chicago, we had a sort of mini show that was in this beautiful ballroom with crystal chandeliers and just this really old school space. And it was, again, a mini show. So there was 3 storytellers. And then we had an OB-GYN from Chicago come with her harp. So it was so cool to see like this OB-GYN with her harp and then to see you with this cello. What was that like for you? Because I'm smiling now because I just thought that was such a cool night.
Audrey was incredible, the harpist. And for me, it was so special because I walked in and I saw this harp and I said, wait, this is exactly the image that I associate with my family and music. My grandmother's harp, we have inherited it since she passed away in 2019. And it sits in our living room, this majestic 100-year-old gold-plated ornate harp. And then to walk into this new event and see the harp, it was again a sense of comfort that I felt and excitement to hear Audrey play and also share this passion for music with another medical provider a little bit further along in her training. So that was just wonderful. And also being at a conference for women in medicine, I was surrounded by the most badass women that I could imagine, just starting my career. And oftentimes I think at conferences as a medical student, you don't necessarily feel like you're contributing much. There's more so a sense of, oh, who can I meet? Who might I be able to network with? What conversations are going to be meaningful? And so to have the opportunity to be someone that could contribute gave me a feeling of belonging in the medical field that as a student, I think oftentimes we don't feel like we're quite there yet.
And the Chicago version of the story was a bit different. And for this one, you worked with Molly. So talk about working with Molly.
So Molly is a dancer. And because of that, we discovered kind of this mutual understanding for what it feels like to reach a flow state within your art. More so than the structure or anything that Charlie had kind of done the brunt work with me on developing. And so Molly and I spent more time getting into those moments and being present with them. And I remember 2 things from our coaching, which still were so powerful to me. The first was she did an exercise with me that she'd never done before with anyone else. She had me say the end of my story as all questions. And once I did that, then she had me do it again, ask questions again. But she would ask the same question back to me. And so, for example, I would say, where do you feel the peace in your body? And she would repeat, where do you feel it in your body? And we did that for the whole rest of the story. And I wanted to answer her questions, but that wasn't the exercise. But because of that, I started discovering the answers to those questions. And then it changed the entire ending of the piece. The second thing that she had me do was set an intention for the show in Chicago. And so my intention was, in the end of that story, when she had me ask questions of myself, that I would be fully present in the thought process and essentially improv it. I had a few parts of the skeleton that I knew I wanted to include, but then it was just kind of see where my mind goes in the moment and trust that. And I did, and the energy of the room changed. And that was really, really cool.
How did the energy of the room change?
So we were performing during a dinner kind of dessert reception. And in the beginning of the story, people were eating. I could hear a lot of background noise and conversation. After I played the first part with my cello, I think there was slightly more engagement. I could feel more attention on me. And then once I started that end portion, there was absolute silence in the room. It was powerful, and I didn't honestly know that I was capable of doing that.
I was sitting at a table in the front, and I think your story was the third story. It was the final story. And I remember you got up there, and you're right. Like, there was some commotion in the room, and you sort of looking at me, and you were like, should I begin? And I was like, just begin, just begin. And yeah, over the course of the story, it was like molecules that were all scattered. And then by the end, they were all just aligned and like pointing right at you. And yeah, what you said, I didn't know that I was capable of that. I'm just wondering, like, how does that tie in with your journey as a med student who is so early in the learning curve? It's so easy to feel scared, all the imposter syndrome things that we deal with as med students. So how did those things settle out for you after the performance?
They're still slightly at odds, I would say. But having that experience, as well as one other experience performing here for a Stanford Medicine big donors event on a huge stage, playing for pretty important people in medicine, and realizing that I have a contribution to make within this community. It's not the typical power we might associate with medicine and with the hierarchy that's in place. And yet, through music or through art, I've received respect, and that helps me build my confidence to realize that when I am interfacing with patients and speaking with them, that's also an art form.
You're continuing to do these virtual concerts for patients, and you said you have a journal where you take notes after each virtual concert. Mm-hmm. You also mentioned linking up with a program that organizes this. So talk a bit more about the virtual concerts that you do and the framework under which you do them and how that all works.
When the pandemic first started, I received an email from one of my professors at Brown of a New York Times article that was explaining a program called Project Music Heals Us that was doing virtual concerts for critically ill patients. And I read this article, watched the accompanying video, and knew that I had to do something similar. So I called up Tim Amos, who's the dad of 2 children that I used to nanny in Providence, actually, and is also a critical care physician, now based in Denver, Colorado. And I just said, Tim, can I please play for your patients? And he said, yes, anything. I need something to give them. Because visitation was totally limited. These patients were alone, often dying alone, and the healthcare providers also were just strapped for resources. And so I started playing concerts for his patients, very much on call. I was at my parents' house, not doing anything, basically applying to medical school. And he would just call me randomly and say, hey, can you hop on for 10 minutes? I have a patient. They would love to hear some music. And so that began this journey. And then I serendipitously was connected with the founder of Project Music Heals Us, which was the nonprofit that had been featured in the New York Times, and began a partnership with them. We shared best practices and decided that as I was going to medical school, it would make the most sense for me to kind of just merge with them. And so now I'm a part of their Vital Sounds initiative, and we're still playing concerts in Denver, Colorado with the hospital that Dr. Amos is associated with, and have also formed a partnership with Stanford recently. They just rolled out their first concert last week, actually, in a transfusion center and inpatient psychiatric unit. And we're also starting the first research study on this virtual concert program at Stanford as well. So it's very exciting. Lots of new opportunities to actually study what we've already put into practice.
So what do you see? Do you see yourself continuing to do this kind of research? Is there a particular domain of music and medicine research that especially interests you? For example, like music and critical illness, kind of like you were doing during COVID, or music and dementia, like different diseases or different patient populations, or just are you more interested generally? Like, where is your heart leading you in this music and medicine journey?
Right now, my heart is leading me towards the practice of music and medicine more so than the research of music and medicine. So I've previously done work in music and surgery, music and dementia, music and pediatric anesthesia, and now music and critical illness. And for me, the most fulfilling things have been when I've been able to share my music, or when I've been able to witness other people benefiting from either listening to a playlist or getting a concert themselves from someone else. I think the research is important and something that I love being a part of, but the personal fulfillment is very much in the direct interface with patients.
Well, I cannot wait to see how things end up, where you end up, what you end up doing. You're not far, so I'll have my eye on you. And maybe just to close, any final message or thought that you'd like to share with the Nocturnist audience?
So someone shared this with me earlier this week. I was having a little bit of a rough week, and they just told me, Melanie, do something kind for yourself today. And so whether that be listening to your favorite piece of music, drawing a picture, going outside, I think living by that philosophy is really important and can do wonders.
I have been talking to student doctor Melanie Ambler. Melanie, thank you so much for telling your story on the Nocturnist stage twice and for being here with me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening. This episode of The Nocturnist was produced, edited, and mixed by John Oliver and produced by Carly Besser. Melanie's story was coached by Charlie Varon with support from the Nocturnist head of story development, Molly Rose Williams. The story was performed live at the Nocturnist show Together Again at the Brava Theater in San Francisco in June of 2022, and then again in September of 2022 at the Women in Medicine Summit. Our executive producer is Ali Block, our chief operating officer is Rebecca Groves, and Noor Al-Saad is our development and outreach specialist. Our original theme music was composed by Yosef Monroe, and any additional music is from Blue Dot Sessions. Illustrations for this season of The Nocturnist are by Eva Vasquez. The Nocturnist is made possible by the California Medical Association, a physician-led organization that works tirelessly to make sure that the doctor-patient relationship remains at the center of medicine. To learn more about the CMA, visit cmadocs.org. The Nocturnist is also sponsored by the California Healthcare Foundation and donations from listeners like you. Thank you so much for supporting our work in storytelling. If you enjoy the show, please help others find us by giving us a rating or review wherever you get your podcasts. To contribute your voice to an upcoming project or to make a donation, visit our website at thenocturnist.com. I'm your host, Emily Silverman. See you next time.